So how would you imagine following those folks you feel? It's really great to see you all here. You know, I think we only announced this event a week ago, and filling the Perth Town Hall is not London. Thank you so much for being here. And can you also please just thank Christine's from the other side of the country. Anytime I feel sorry for myself, my travel schedule, I look at Christine's diary. Thank you for making it all the way up. That. I'm going to come back to that in a second. This is what I'm talking about. I think Christine has beautifully laid the politics out for us, that this is there to be won, and that people power is what is going to do it, and that taking the power back in a sense of how our power is generated and distributed, and how our political power is generated and distributed is what tonight's about. I want to talk, and then Rach obviously has gone through that kind of what we simply must not let get through the gate. In Queensland, in parts of Queensland, they've lost, you know, and that there's really good farm country in Queensland that's been destroyed. In New South Wales, in most places, it's in the balance, and in Western Australia, it's in the balance. So really blocking the gate on these people. But I want to talk about what we're going to do instead. Why is it exactly that this industry is so completely obsolete? We don't need it anymore. We don't need nukes anymore. We don't need coal. We certainly don't need a gas fracking industry. It's obsolete, and here's what we're going to do to replace it. There are some folk in the room from an organisation called Sustainable Energy Now who wrote some scenarios that I'm going to talk through. They rely heavily for 100% renewable energy here in Western Australia and South West on traditional stuff like wind, but also on advanced innovation like the Carnegie Wave Energy Plant that's based out of North Korea. 3 of those units going in Australia and Ireland at the moment. Nothing in the scenarios that the guys wrote for us is science fiction. It's all real. And they're actually, in a sense, quite limited. I'll talk about the limitations of the study in a second. Speaking of real, this is a plant in Nevada they're just about to switch on, 6 times larger than the one that Christine and I visited. Christine's photographed it before. So this is like a magnifying glass a mile and a half across. And it's just reflecting sunlight onto the central receiving tower, and it's storing a molten salt solution at 550 degrees in these tanks at the bottom. And then you can run on these plants 24/7 flat out. It's as flexible as a gas plant, it's reliable as a coal plant, and it runs 100% on sunlight. Very labour intensive, as you can imagine. Less capital intensive, but this is a lot of blue collar stuff. It's one of the reasons why we're so keen on protecting TAFE and protecting tertiary education. Training for fitters and welders, turners and metalworking fabrication. It's an incredibly jobs-rich agenda, and we have thrown the gauntlet down to South Australia. Stuff Port Augusta. We're going to get that bill here first. Challenge on, they've accepted, so let's get to it. The curious thing is, and I don't know if this surprised the sand folk who built the scenarios for us, but it certainly surprised me. It's cheaper to phase out the technology that is cooking the planet than not to. Even if you don't care about the costs of cooking the planet and setting loose, you know, tens and then hundreds of millions of refugees, damage to infrastructure, damage to houses, damage to everything, damage to the global security environment. Even if you set that aside, as the denialists the presently occupied Prime Minister's office are very good at doing, it's cheaper to build the renewable technology and replace and bring it in under the existing technology that's kept the lights on, that's keeping the lights on now. It's cheaper to do it by the year 2029 because by the end of that replacement cycle, you've abolished your fuel bill, you've abolished your coal bill and your gas bill, and you no longer pay for fuel. And that's profound. Once the capital is installed, gradually this is what is happening in South Australia, which for a period of time, a week or 2 ago, ran at 100% renewable. Did everybody catch that? South Australia was 100% renewable for a period of time and was exporting to the rest of the national electricity market. And wholesale prices in SA are on the way down because these generators are being in at a marginal cost of 0. They don't have fuel costs. That's a profound change. And that is what has the coal and gas industry so terrified. It's not like a temporary phase out, these things are not compatible. It's actually going to drive these energy sources to extinction before the energy sources drive us to extinction. The fact that it was cheaper by the year 2029 kind of blew us away. How it's done? Four-stage process. Number one, probably the most important one, putting all that, as much as I love the shiny technology, putting that aside for a second, the most important thing is energy efficiency. Just stop wasting it. You know, not when you turn the shower head on, imagining that actually the best way to heat that water up is to fire up a coal burner 350 kilometres away to send those electrons up to convert that cold heat, most of which is wasted and discarded in the process, back into heat at the end. Just put a solar hot water heater on the roof, yeah, and just heat the water up. Yeah. Eliminating the profoundly wasteful use of energy and electricity is the single most important step in the scenario that makes the rest of the technology possible. So that's step one. Step two is the cheap stuff. Solar PV and wind energy is now cheaper to install those two technologies, this thing called grid parity, than new coal and new gas. And that is why Christine says, hey, we won. She's not exaggerating. We won. The technology, finally the economics are driving, as well as the moral arguments and as well as the why don't we just preserve civilization instead of trashing it arguments. Now the economics are behind us, which means we're actually starting to fight some downhill battles, no matter how political politics might look. So take the cheap stuff first. Build as much solar photovoltaic and as much wind as the network can handle, and take that as first dispatch. So you've almost flipped the base load question upside down. As base load is first dispatch, you take the cheap stuff. Thank you. Then to fill that in, these very large backup solar thermal concentrator plants. This is the general model, because these things, as I said before, you can run them flat out 24/7 on sunlight, and because they're so flexible, they play beautifully with the more variable output that you get from wind and solar PV. So you can kind of fill the gaps, and that's what I mean about turning that base load question upside down. And then thirdly, for these conservative engineers, no matter how hard we tried, they insisted that their model be conservative and fairly shock-proof. We've noticed the only technologies that are in here are stuff that they could adequately cost, using economics only from the Commonwealth Government. And they said, imagine the worst case scenario 4 times a year. There's a solar and wind drought. You've never heard of it before they introduced this concept, where there's no sunlight and the wind doesn't blow anywhere in the southwest. If you had that scenario, yeah, you think it's funny, thank you. If you had that scenario that hits you 4 times a year, could you keep everything running? Could you actually, would the system stay stable, or would you have brownouts and fry people's computers? So the final step is this extra level and layer of backup using distributed small-scale biomass and a bit of pumped hydro, which is something the Japanese have got very good at. It's like a dam used as a battery. When the wind's blowing, you pump water uphill. When the wind's not blowing, you've got a hydro power station. A handful of small ones distributed around the landscape, and they do this in Okinawa and Australia, Japan. And that's the kind of fourfold model for getting off the fossil treadmill permanently in Western Australia. Here's what it looked like on the map. Here's what we have at the moment. This is the so-called Barnett as usual scenario. It says, imagine if you turned all the coal and gas generators up to 100 at the same time, which you wouldn't do if you did. That's the sort of theoretical maximum capacity. So big coal burners in Collie, coal and gas in Kwinana, some of these are private power stations. You can already see the size. It's a 200 megawatt wind farm. You can already see the size of some of the installations. But this basically is a 19th century centralised grid that burns coal and gas and sends it out to the centres of load. And that's what we have at the moment. And could you believe, because I don't think a single person has been sacked for this, the Barnett government just wasted $1 billion, $1 billion with a B. Might as well have pushed the money into a big pile, doused it in petrol and set fire to $1 billion that probably would have generated more electricity on infrastructure that we can't use. Infrastructure like a diesel-fired power station that will never be switched on. Or like the future, we take this dinosaur, we apply CPR, a catastrophic event, expense, and we've got the future coal-fired power station, like a small, creaky version of Hazelwood. Just shitty. We don't need this thing on the grid anymore. $300 or $400 million worth of generators that we just don't need. That's the Barnett as usual scenario. Come the next state election, I think we really need to do something about the people that torched $1 billion on fossil fuel infrastructure that the state can't. So the Sustainable Energy Now folk, and I don't know whether they've got their materials up the back, but if you've got a technical background, an engineering background, or you just like hanging around really smart people, you should join Sustainable Energy Now, or if that is intimidating to you like it is to me, just throw them some money so that they can continue doing this research. So they built two scenarios, and the sort of baselines of the scenarios were nothing from start. It's only going to be technology that exists, that you can reliably model the economics from. And that second kind of caveat was that worst case kind of apocalypse Mordor scenario where there's no wind or sun, you still have to keep the lights on. And we deliberately asked them for two scenarios. We could have said 50. I don't care how it looks. For example, there's very little distributed energy in there because at the time they didn't have accurate economics for what if, the extraordinary innovation going on in the automotive sector at the moment with electric cars means that actually by the year 2029, in the carport you've just got a large standalone battery, or maybe even a small one, and you have actually taken your power back, and we've just got distributed generation all the way through the network. It's more likely to end up like that. But in the meantime, here's that pathway. Here's scenario one. So if you can kind of visualise, the stuff that's not there is the energy efficiency because we did solar hot water and we turned the lights off when we're not using them and stuff like that. Then this is a very solar-heavy scenario. The largest renewable energy generator in the year 2029 is still the Perth metropolitan area because of the number of people who took their power back and installed PV on the rooftops. So you can see it's dispersed the generators all the way out to where the resource is. Solar in the sunbelt, wave, wind, biomass distributed. This is not obviously burning native forest, but burning oil mallee copper crops that are just perennial, keep coming back year after year. And that scenario is scenario one that allows you to keep the lights on even in a pretty bad case scenario and ends up being cheaper than not doing it. Who'd have thought? And scenario two is a bit more diverse. It disperses stuff, it uses different technologies, actually came out even cheaper than the first one. I just did a bit of thing about the solar power stations, have you seen that? And both of those scenarios are now going to be used by us as lifting off points to say, all right, how do we deliver this? How do we let the market deliver it? What role should the state play? What role should the federal government play? And those policy levers, things like the renewable energy target, I'll come back to right at the end. How do we deliver it? And it won't look like that. It'll look like something else. Yeah? It was going to look like something. The main thing is it's possible, it's doable, that we do not have a technology or engineering problem here. We've got a very severe political problem. And in terms of jobs, as you can imagine, that's replacing essentially sort of electricity infrastructure. 22 to 26,000 construction jobs, again, most of the trades, a lot of the color stuff. Rooftop installations, fixed solar farm, wind energy jobs. It's a really jobs-rich agenda. Here's the other interesting thing. The solar postcodes research that Chantal and others did said what are the postcodes that have the highest installation of solar and it turns out that it maps inversely to wealth, the median household income. Inversely. It's not postcode and Netherlands. It's Bulldogs is number one. Pinjarra and Canning Vale. Not because people living in those postcodes are already ecologists all of a sudden, but because it makes the most sense for the household energy bills. And that is what gives you hope. Those people have done at a small scale, at a household scale, probably some of the people in this room, what we now need to do in the entire state. Just eliminate the fuel bill for all time. You can clap at that if you like. Can you see how I'm going to speed up. For every $1 million we invest in the gas industry, these gigantic robotic plants that sit out and obliterate rock art, we create 5 jobs. The rest of the agenda is incredibly jobs rich, including the renewable energy sector. Less capital intensive, a lot more labour intensive. So it's time now to take our power back. Here is the thing, and I couldn't believe this when I was told. If that renewable energy target stays in place, if Labor doesn't sell us out, if Parliament just walks the hell off stage right and just stays at home, just don't return us on home, and if Labor doesn't sell us out, and that's a really key thing, we keep that renewable energy target in place, that is the equivalent, just for WA, of a bit over 400 megawatts of green, clean generation between now and the year 2020. 4 plants of that size if that's what you wanted to do, couldn't care less. Put in some wind, do some biomass, let Carnegie build more wind farms. But that is the magnitude of what's at stake on the table, and that is why the industry is freaking out. Between now and 2020, 4 of those, that's the equivalent of clean energy generation that's on the table just for Western Australia if it's all built here. Try and imagine the scale of transformation that's unfolded across this continent if we hold on to the renewable energy target, tip this obsolete, climate-denying, dangerous government out of office, the ones up on Hay Street and the ones on Capitol Hill in Canberra. That's actually what's on the table for us. I feel like this within reach if we take our power back. Thanks very much.